Buried beneath the sands of time, hidden within the remnants of the world's first great civilization, lies a list, an ancient, enigmatic record that challenges everything we think we know about human history. Inscribed on weathered clay tablets dating back more than 4,000 years, this list does not merely recount the reigns of kings as we understand them. It presents a stunning, almost incomprehensible narrative, one that speaks of rulers who did not govern for decades, but for tens of thousands of years. This is the Sumerian-King-List, a document that, if taken at face value, defies the very laws of human mortality. These kings did not rule for 10 years, 50 years, or even a century. Some held dominion for over 40,000 years, their legacies stretching across epochs so vast that they seem almost mythological. But is this truly a myth, or is there a deeper, more unsettling reality beneath the surface? Eridu, Bad-Tibira, Larak. These were the cities they ruled, places where, according to Sumerian texts, kingship itself descended from the heavens, bestowing authority upon rulers whose lifespans defy logic. Alulim, the first recorded king, is said to have ruled for 28,800 years, followed by Alongar, who reigned for another staggering 36,000 years. And they were not alone. Their successors continued this impossible tradition, governing for spans of time that should be beyond the reach of any mortal being. Then, something changed. A great flood, a cataclysm remembered not just in Sumerian records, but echoed in the biblical story of Noah, the Hindu tale of Manu, and the flood myths of civilizations across the world, swept through the land, marking a stark shift in human history. After this event, the lifespans of kings drastically declined, their reigns reduced from tens of thousands of years to mere centuries, then decades, aligning with the lifespans of ordinary humans. What happened? Was there an external force that reshaped human existence? Were these ancient rulers, who some believe may have been more than human, removed or replaced by something else? Was the flood a natural disaster or a deliberate reset? Skeptics argue that the extreme reign lengths were symbolic, representing dynasties rather than individuals, or that early civilizations simply exaggerated their histories. Yet, the Sumerians were meticulous record keepers, their accounting and astronomy far ahead of their time. Could they really have fabricated such precise figures without reason? Or were they preserving a history that modern scholars refuse to acknowledge? A history that suggests that, before the flood, humanity was different. Some theorists point to the possibility of genetic manipulation, lost technology, or even the intervention of beings that ancient texts describe as gods. Figures like the Anunnaki, deities who, according to Sumerian belief, descended from the stars and ruled over mankind. If so, does this explain the unfathomable reigns of these ancient kings? And more chillingly, does it mean that remnants of this lost era still exist, hidden from the world, waiting to be uncovered? The Sumerian-King-List is more than an anomaly. It is a doorway to a past that may have been deliberately obscured. If its numbers are true, then history as we know it is nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. What do you think? Do these numbers indicate something more than just myths? Is it possible that ancient rulers possessed knowledge or abilities that we no longer understand? Leave a comment below with the number 7 if you believe there's more to this story than we've been told. And if you find this topic as fascinating as we do, share this video with others who are ready to uncover the secrets of our forgotten past. The truth is waiting. Are we ready to accept it? Inscribed upon the ancient Blundell tablet, a relic from a civilization lost to time, the Sumerian-King-List presents us with numbers that seem to defy all logic, stretching the very limits of human comprehension. Kings ruling not for decades, nor even centuries, but for tens of thousands of years. An impossibility by modern standards, yet meticulously recorded by the first known civilization to master writing, mathematics, and law. Alulim of Eridu, reigning for an unfathomable 28,800 years, followed by Alongar, who extended the dominion of Eridu for another 36,000 years, ruling long before recorded history as we know it even began. Then came the kings of Bad-Tibira, like Enmenlu-Ana, whose rule extended a staggering 43,200 years, and his successor Enmengal-Ana, governing for another 28,800 years. Finally, Ensipad-Zid-Ana of Larak, whose tenure spanned 28,800 years. completing a lineage of rulers who, by any measure of human physiology, should have been impossible. These figures challenge every assumption about history, time, and the very nature of human existence. How is it conceivable that these rulers reigned for durations that eclipse entire epochs of modern civilization? Why would the Sumerians, an advanced and highly methodical society, fabricate such precise numbers if they were not attempting to document something real? The questions linger, forcing us to confront possibilities that extend far beyond traditional archaeology and into the realm of the unknown. The anomaly becomes even more perplexing when we observe the sharp contrast between these extraordinary reigns and those that followed the Great Flood. An event that is not only recorded in Sumerian mythology, but appears in countless traditions around the world, from the biblical deluge that spared Noah, to the Hindu story of Manu, the Greek legend of Deucalion, and the ancient tales of the Americas, all describing a catastrophic flood that wiped out an advanced civilization. Or was something, or someone, intervening? The sharp decline in rain length suggests an external force, a deliberate reset of the world as it was once known. Could it be that these early rulers were not fully human in the way we understand humanity today? The Sumerians themselves believed their kingship descended from the heavens, a phrase repeated in their texts, reinforcing the notion that their first rulers had celestial origins. Could this be a reference to an advanced race, perhaps the Anunnaki, those enigmatic beings often described in Sumerian myths as powerful entities who shaped human civilization? The Anunnaki have long been a subject of speculation. Were they divine, as the Sumerians believed, or were they something else entirely, an advanced intelligence that played a direct role in the development of early human societies? If the first Sumerian kings were connected to these beings, it could explain their astonishingly long reigns. Many researchers have proposed that early civilizations possessed knowledge or technology far beyond what we have assumed. Could genetic factors, environmental conditions, or unknown biological processes have contributed to these rulers' extended reigns? While mainstream historians argue that these figures may represent dynastic names rather than individual lifespans, some researchers propose that pre-flood civilizations may have possessed advanced knowledge, perhaps even lost medical or genetic techniques, that prolonged lifespans beyond what we consider possible today. The idea that knowledge of immortality, or at least extreme longevity, was erased along with the flood is not without precedent. Nearly every ancient civilization references a time when gods walked among men, a golden age when lifespans stretched beyond the limits of modern comprehension. The Bible itself recounts the long lives of figures like Methuselah, who lived for 969 years, and Noah, who survived for 950 years. If these accounts are to be taken as more than mere mythology, then what changed? One of the most compelling theories suggests that the Great Flood was not merely a natural disaster, but an intentional reset, a cleansing event designed to remove an earlier form of humanity. If the pre-flood rulers were in some way different, genetically enhanced, divinely altered, or perhaps even members of an ancient non-human lineage, then the flood may have been meant to wipe out that line completely, replacing it with a new form of humanity with much shorter lifespans. This would explain why, after the flood, human longevity rapidly diminished. It is as if an external force, whether divine, extraterrestrial, or something else entirely, saw fit to erase the previous order and impose a new, restricted form of human life. Yet, remnants of this lost era remain. The detailed records of the Sumerians, carefully transcribed on clay tablets and preserved despite the erosion of time, provide tantalizing glimpses into a past that defies conventional wisdom. Archaeological evidence has corroborated the existence of many cities mentioned in the king list, including Eridu, which is often regarded as the first city ever built, aligning precisely with the narrative of kingship descending from the heavens. The layers of civilization discovered at these sites indicate an unbroken lineage of advanced society dating back over 7,000 years. Yet the myth suggests something even older, something stretching back tens of thousands of years before recorded history. If Eridu truly was the first city, then who built it? And were its first rulers truly human in the way we understand humanity today? There are further enigmas to consider. The structure of the king list itself suggests a deliberate attempt to document a reality that may have been inconvenient or even dangerous to those who came after. Unlike purely mythical texts, the king list is presented in a structured, methodical fashion, listing cities, names, and precise reign lengths as though they were factual records rather than allegories. Why would the Sumerians, renowned for their precise astronomical calculations and their detailed economic records, fabricate such an elaborate sequence of reigns unless they were attempting to preserve something important? And why does this same pattern appear in other ancient civilizations? From the long-lived Egyptian pharaohs of the First Dynasty to the near-immortal rulers of early Chinese mythology, the concept of extended lifespans among early kings is a global phenomenon, one that points to a shared, lost history. If the reigns of the pre-flood kings were not merely exaggerated but reflected an actual biological or technological reality, then the implications are profound. It would mean that at some point in the distant past, there existed individuals or beings whose understanding of life and time far exceeded our own. Were these beings guiding humanity? Were they the architects of civilization, teaching the Sumerians the arts of writing, mathematics, and astronomy? Or were they something else entirely, an earlier form of human, now extinct, erased from history? If so, could their knowledge still exist somewhere, hidden beneath the sands of Iraq, locked away in unexcavated ruins, or even secretly preserved by those who have inherited their legacy? The Sumerian king list remains one of the most mystifying documents ever discovered, an artifact that challenges our very perception of time, history, and human potential. Whether it is a distorted memory of a lost civilization, a remnant of an era when gods and men walked the earth together, or a warning of truths that were deliberately buried, it remains a puzzle waiting to be solved. The deeper we look into its numbers, the more it forces us to question what we think we know. Were the first kings of humanity truly men, or were they something more? Beings who ruled before the flood, before time as we measure it, before history as we understand it? If their reigns were real, then perhaps the flood was not merely an act of nature, but an act of war, a final struggle between two epochs, one lost, one surviving. And if that is the case, then what secrets still remain, waiting to be uncovered, waiting for those who dare to ask the forbidden questions? Then, disaster struck. A flood of unimaginable scale engulfed the land, wiping away everything that had come before. The Sumerians called it the Great Deluge, an event so cataclysmic that it marked a turning point in human history. Before the flood, kings had ruled for tens of thousands of years, their reigns stretching across epochs that modern civilization cannot even fathom. But after the waters receded, everything changed. A new era began, one where kings no longer lived for millennia, but for mere centuries, then decades, until they became as mortal as the people they ruled. The shift was immediate and undeniable. Etana of Kish, once a great ruler, now reigned for only 1,500 years, a fraction of the reigns recorded before. And Nenabur-Agessi of Kish ruled for a mere 900 years. And by the time of Gilgamesh of Uruk, one of the most legendary figures in Sumerian history, a king's rule had been reduced to 126 years, an impossibly stark contrast to his predecessors who had ruled for tens of thousands of years. What had happened? What force had rewritten the fabric of human existence so completely? And why did this monumental shift in longevity coincide so precisely with the flood, an event that was not only recorded by the Sumerians but echoed across nearly every ancient civilization? Was it merely an environmental catastrophe, or was something far more profound at play? There are those who argue that the Great Flood was a deliberate intervention, an event that was not merely an accident of nature, but a reset, a carefully orchestrated event meant to erase a civilization that had reached the limits of knowledge, power, and longevity. It is no coincidence that nearly every ancient culture, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, records a flood of global proportions. In the biblical account, Noah is chosen to survive while the rest of the world is swept away. In Hindu mythology, Manu, the progenitor of mankind, is warned by the god Vishnu and instructed to build an ark. In Greek legend, Deucalion and Pyrrha repopulate the earth after the flood destroys an older, more advanced civilization. Were all these stories merely parallel myths, or were they remnants of a shared truth? an event that truly reshaped the world. Before the flood, the world was different. The rulers of Sumer were not just kings, they were demigods, titans of immense power, whose lifespans exceeded all natural limits. If the records of the Sumerians are to be believed, these kings did not merely rule. They possessed a form of existence far beyond that of ordinary humans. They were spoken of as beings who had descended from the heavens, and their reigns were measured not in decades, but in tens of thousands of years. How could this be? Modern science tells us that humans have always had a limited lifespan, constrained by biology and time. But the Sumerians, the first known civilization to record history, tell us a different story. One where the rulers of old were more than human. Could it be that these early kings were a different kind of being, something beyond our current understanding? The Anunnaki, the enigmatic figures who dominate Sumerian mythology, are described as beings who descended from the stars, bringing with them knowledge, power, and order. They were said to be the architects of early civilization, the gods who bestowed kingship upon mankind. Could these long-reigning rulers of Sumer have been their direct descendants? If so, did they possess some kind of genetic advantage, a biological inheritance that allowed them to defy the natural limits of human aging? And if that were true, then what changed after the flood? Was it a genetic alteration, something that stripped future rulers of their extended lifespans? Or was the flood itself a means of erasing that ancient bloodline? Some researchers believe that the Great Flood was not just a disaster, it was an act of war. If an ancient ruling class had access to knowledge or abilities that made them near mortal, then wiping out that lineage would be the only way to ensure control over the new world. Were these early kings part of a lost superior race, one that was systematically eliminated? The abrupt change in lifespans suggests a deliberate suppression of knowledge or power, a transition from an age where rulers lived for tens of thousands of years to an era where they were subject to the same limitations as ordinary men. Could it be that after the flood, a new humanity was created, one that was no longer capable of achieving the same longevity? Some theories suggest that genetic manipulation could have played a role, that the survivors of the flood were somehow altered, ensuring that their descendants would never again reach the same heights of power as their ancestors. This brings us to one of the most unsettling questions. Were the pre-flood rulers even human at all? The Sumerians were clear in their texts. Kingship descended from the heavens. This phrase, repeated throughout their records, implies that the first rulers were not simply chosen. They were placed upon the earth by forces greater than mankind. If the Anunnaki, as some theories suggest, were truly responsible for shaping early civilization, then could these ancient kings have been their direct representatives or even their offspring? The book of Genesis describes the Nephilim, the giants of old, as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men, a hybrid race that existed before the flood, but was seemingly wiped out afterward. Could the Sumerian kings of pre-flood times have been something similar? Beings who were the result of an ancient genetic experiment? Rulers whose lifespans were far beyond human norms because they were not entirely human to begin with? And if so, then who or what decided to end that era? Did the Great Flood serve as a way to eliminate these beings, resetting humanity to a more manageable state? If the flood was an engineered event, then who were the architects? Were the Anunnaki the ones who created the flood, seeking to erase their earlier works and start anew? Or was there another force, another faction at play, one that sought to liberate humanity from the influence of the old gods? The drastic reduction in lifespan following the flood suggests that something monumental occurred, something that fundamentally changed the nature of humanity itself. Before, we had rulers whose reigns spanned millennia. Afterward, they barely surpassed a century. If this was not natural, then it was imposed. Today, we are left with only fragments of this lost history. The ruins of Eridu, the first city according to Sumerian records, still stand in silent testimony to a forgotten past. The Sumerian tablets, despite their age, continue to defy explanation, presenting us with numbers and narratives that modern archaeology refuses to acknowledge as anything more than myth. But if these myths were merely stories, then why do they align so precisely with accounts found in civilizations scattered across the world? Why do so many ancient cultures describe an age of long-lived rulers, a great flood, and a sudden, irreversible shift in human longevity? The deeper we look, the more we are forced to confront a reality that does not fit within the boundaries of accepted history. Something happened in the distant past, something that changed the course of civilization forever. The Sumerians recorded it, but mainstream history has ignored it. And if the Great Flood was indeed a deliberate reset, then what was its purpose? Was it a punishment, a necessary cleansing? Or was it an act of control, ensuring that the knowledge of the pre-flood world was lost forever? And if that knowledge still exists, buried beneath the sands of time, then what would happen if it were ever rediscovered? Perhaps the flood did not merely erase a civilization. Perhaps it erased something far greater, the memory of who we once were, and the truth of what we might have become. The remarkable thing about the Sumerian king list is that it is not merely an ancient legend. It is a document grounded in archaeological discoveries that defy conventional history. This is not just mythology carved into clay. It is a record that aligns eerily with physical evidence left behind by a civilization that predates all known human empires. The Weld Blundell 444 tablet, housed at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, is one of the most compelling artifacts supporting the legitimacy of this list. This tablet, a relic dating back more than 4,000 years, meticulously records the reigns of Sumerian kings, including those who ruled for tens of thousands of years before the Great Flood. The precision of this inscription is undeniable. Why would a civilization renowned for its accuracy in astronomy, mathematics, and governance fabricate something so elaborate if it were mere myth? The Sumerians were not prone to exaggeration. They recorded their grain inventories, trade transactions, and celestial observations with meticulous detail. Why then, when it comes to their kings, should we assume they were suddenly writing fantasy? The very existence of this tablet forces us to ask an unsettling question. Was the history of civilization far older and far more extraordinary than we have been led to believe? The mysteries only deepen when we turn to Eridu, the city that the Sumerians themselves called the first city on Earth. The Sumerian-King-List states unequivocally that kingship descended from the heavens to Eridu, marking it as the origin of human civilization. For centuries, scholars debated whether Eridu was simply a legendary place, but then the sands of Mesopotamia gave up their secrets. Archaeologists have indeed uncovered the ruins of Eridu in present-day Iraq, revealing evidence of a sophisticated settlement that dates back at least 7,000 years, with some structures even older. If Eridu was truly the first city, who built it? And why did the Sumerians believe that kingship itself, the divine right to rule, was not something that emerged naturally among humans, but rather something that was given to them by forces beyond this world? The phrase, "descended from the heavens," is repeated throughout Sumerian mythology, and it is difficult to ignore the implications. If we are to take the Sumerians at their word, kingship was not a human invention, but rather a mandate bestowed upon certain individuals by celestial beings. Could it be that Eridu was not merely the first human city, but the first colony, a place where knowledge, power, and authority were deliberately granted by entities that ancient humans saw as gods? If so, were the long-lived kings of the pre-flood world direct descendants of these beings, entrusted with their rule, their wisdom, and perhaps even their longevity? And then there is the flood, the cataclysm that changed everything. The idea of a great deluge wiping out an advanced civilization is not confined to the Sumerian texts alone. It is found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim is warned of the coming catastrophe, a tale that mirrors the biblical story of Noah. It is in the Hindu scriptures where Vishnu instructs Manu to preserve life. It is in the myths of the Maya, the Aztecs, the Greeks, and the Chinese, a global memory of a world that was washed away, replaced by something new. But where mythology provides the story, archaeology provides the evidence. At excavation sites such as Shuruppak and Ur, two of the key cities in Sumerian history, scientists have discovered something remarkable. A thick layer of clay and silt, evidence of a flood that swept through the region around 2900 BCE. This is not speculation. The geological layers confirm that a sudden and devastating flood occurred, one that disrupted settlements and marked the end of an era. But if the flood was real, what does that mean for the pre-flood kings? If the waters truly wiped away the world they ruled, then what became of them? Did they perish alongside their cities? Or did they, somehow, survive? This leads to an even greater enigma. If the rulers of the pre-flood world were so vastly different, if they truly lived for tens of thousands of years, what were they? Were they human as we understand the term today, or were they something else entirely? Some theorists suggest that the pre-flood kings may have possessed knowledge and genetic traits that allowed for extreme longevity, traits that were lost, suppressed, or even actively removed after the flood. Could the Great Deluge have been more than just a natural disaster? Some believe it was an intentional reset, a way to erase a civilization that had become too powerful, too advanced, or perhaps too uncontrollable. If the flood was an act of destruction, was it carried out by nature, by divine intervention, or by forces we have yet to understand? And if a great civilization was lost, could remnants of it still exist, waiting to be uncovered? What makes these questions even more pressing is the eerie alignment of ancient texts from different cultures. The Sumerians were the first to record the of divine kingship, but similar themes appear. Egyptian pharaohs were co-descendants of the gods, legendary rulers with lifespans stretching into the thousands of years. In Book of Genesis, Methuselah and Noah lived for centuries. Patterns found fragments of a forgotten reality. The truth is unraveling, piece by piece, emerging from the shadows of history that has long been distorted, rewritten, or simply erased. If these kings truly existed, if they ruled for tens of thousands of years as recorded in the Sumerian-King-List, then we must ask the most unsettling question of all: where did they come from? Were they simply men, rulers elevated by legend into gods? Or were they something more, the descendants of an ancient, powerful lineage that predated our known history? The Sumerians themselves were clear in their records. Kingship did not originate with humanity, it was bestowed upon them. Bestowed by whom, and for what purpose? The deeper we delve, the more we find evidence that suggests a reality far stranger than we were ever led to believe. The myths of Sumer, Babylon, Egypt, and countless other civilizations all hint at an era before recorded history, a time when beings of unimaginable power walked among men, when the gods were not distant deities in the sky, but physical entities who interacted, ruled, and shaped the course of human civilization. If the pre-flood kings were truly different from us, if they possessed knowledge and technology that granted them unnatural longevity, then what happened to them? Were they wiped out in the Great Flood, erased from history in a cataclysm that served as more than just an environmental disaster, but as a deliberate attempt to reset civilization? Or did some survive, carrying with them the remnants of a lost world, hidden away, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves once more? There are those who believe that the truth about these ancient rulers has been deliberately concealed, that our history is not what we think it is, but rather a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep humanity ignorant of its true origins. What if our perception of time, of civilization, of the very nature of our past has been manipulated? The idea may sound radical, but consider this. Why do so many ancient texts speak of gods and kings with lifespans that defy all logic? Why does nearly every culture on Earth have some version of the Great Flood, describing a global reset, a world wiped clean of its past? What was so dangerous about the pre-flood world that it had to be erased? And more importantly, did it truly disappear, or was it simply hidden? If the kings of old were more than human, if they were truly connected to the Anunnaki, the mysterious beings described in Sumerian mythology, then does that mean their bloodline, their knowledge, their power still exists somewhere in the world today? Could there be a select few who still carry the legacy of these ancient rulers, pulling the strings of history from the shadows, ensuring that the truth remains buried? If these kings had technology, genetics, or wisdom that allowed them to extend their lifespans far beyond what we believe possible, then does that mean that some of it still survives, hidden away in secret vaults, encoded in ancient manuscripts, or perhaps even embedded in the DNA of those who were chosen to inherit their secrets? And if that is true, if there are forces at work ensuring that we never uncover the full truth about our past, then what else have they kept from us? What else have they rewritten, suppressed, or deliberately obscured? The Sumerian-King-List is not just a document, it is a doorway, a fragment of a forgotten reality that challenges everything we think we know. If we accept that these kings lived as long as the records claim, then we must also accept that our understanding of history is fundamentally flawed. Could it be that the true nature of our past has been hidden from us because knowing it would change everything? What if the kings before the flood were not just rulers, but something greater? Beings who had access to advanced knowledge, superior genetics, or even extraterrestrial origins. And if their empire was erased by the flood, was it an accident, or was it a deliberate act to remove them from history? The deeper we investigate, the more it becomes clear that something is missing. A piece of the puzzle that, if uncovered, could force us to rethink everything about who we are, where we came from, and who, or what, still holds the keys to this ancient secret. But perhaps the most disturbing question of all is this. If these kings, or their descendants, still exist in some form, have they ever truly left us? Have they been watching, waiting, influencing history from behind the scenes? If we have been living in a world built on fabricated timelines, manipulated history, and concealed truths, then what happens when those lies begin to unravel? Could it be that the resurgence of interest in the Anunnaki, the lost civilizations, and the pre-flood world is not mere coincidence, but something more? A sign that we are on the verge of rediscovering what was taken from us long ago. What happens when the veil is lifted? What happens when we begin to remember? The truth is out there. Buried, concealed, waiting. The question is, are we ready to face it? The truth is buried, hidden beneath layers of rewritten history, concealed in artifacts and encoded in the stories of ancient civilizations. But history has a way of revealing itself, if we know where to look. What other secrets have been erased? What knowledge still waits to be uncovered? The Sumerians left us a clue, a record etched in clay that defies conventional understanding. The question now is, will we follow it? Join us as we continue to unearth the lost truths of Sumer, the Anunnaki, and the rulers who walked the earth before the flood. Subscribe, follow, and question everything, because only by seeking the past can we begin to understand the future. Follow, explore, and question everything, because the real history of our world is far stranger than we have been told.